Today, I'm going to do a deep dive on Rachel Cusk. So, she is one of my favorite authors. I have a ton of books by her that I've mostly read multiple times. I most recently I just reread In the Fold and Outline. So I will be giving a more detailed review and discussion of these two books and talk about how I see them fitting into her whole body of work, and then what books I would recommend starting with, and also the books that I don't like as much of hers. Starting with Outline, I think a lot of people discovered her at this point. It was really in the middle of her writing career that she published Outline. So she had already kind of developed herself as a writer, and I think that's very clear in this book because it is quite unique. There is kind of a dreamlike quality to the book and the writing, and I think that's because it is conversation. So it's people talking, but there's very little back and forth. So it almost reads sometimes as if you're not reading dialogue. It's just someone telling their life story, usually, or some chunk of their life story, all in one kind of long paragraph. And there might be a small interjection by the narrator, but usually the person just kind of continues on. The people are so confessional towards her. They're really opening up about the extreme disappointments in their life, about mostly their relationships, but also career disappointments. And there's a woman who talks a lot about her, basically her relationship to womanhood and how that played out as she became very successful in her career, and what effect did that have on her relationship with her husband and also with her child. um, Yet we never hear the author or we never hear the narrator also self-disclosing anything near this level of like intimate details about her life. This anti-description, for want of a better way of putting it, had made something clear to her by a reverse kind of exposition. While he talked, she began to see herself as a shape, an outline, with all the detail filled in around it, while the shape itself remained blank. So that's pretty clearly what's going on in the novel in general. Is the narrator is we're not given a lot of information about the narrator, and we're just filling it in. She's kind of defined by what she doesn't say, and the fact we're getting the outline of her based on like seeing the edges of her and how she interacts with other people. Those times had more or less gone now that she was with Constantine. She wasn't sure why, because he would never have stopped her from going off traveling with Hermione. In fact, he would have liked it, as modern men always liked it when you proved your independence from them. But it would have felt like a fake somehow, she said, a copy, to try to become those girls again, hurtling down those dirt roads, never knowing what they would find at the end of them. So I think that quote really demonstrates the tone of the book. It's a lot of reflection back into the past and what has been lost, what has been gained, how it plays into your relationships with lovers, with friends, with family, and how those all are entangled, basically. And right in that section, there's an example of the way she uses dialogue. So at the top, it says, lately, she said, and you see there's actually quotes. But then in the next paragraph, on the way back down the hill, Elena said she would have to. It's like the author switches between using quotes and then switching to not using quotes, but it's still dialogue. It's still a story that was recounted by someone else. And it's often like really long paragraphs. So you kind of, it doesn't have the feeling of dialogue going back and forth. It's really like just a story within the book that someone is telling. And it's almost like the author or it's almost like the narrator and what's going on with her is just intermissions in between these other stories that are being told. But I will say it somehow still has a feeling of like it's still all tied together as one book. So I definitely do not feel like it is not a collection of short stories like strung together. Absolutely not. Somehow this narrator, even though she's very um like very vague in some way, you still have a strong sense of her. Her name is Faye, which it only says very late in the book once. But Faye is still, she still has a real presence in the book. If we compare it to A Death in the Family, in A Death in the Family, the dialogue is usually pretty short and brief, but then there's all this weight behind everything that's going on, and the narrator goes into these long, detailed explanations of the giving the background of his life. But then, of course, we don't know for the other people, we aren't inside their minds the way we're inside the narrator's mind. And Outline is almost like the inverse, where we do not get any commentary on what's going on in the mind of the narrator, Faye, but instead we are like witnesses to all these other people who are divulging all of these personal secrets, or at least like private feelings and very like deep thoughts and meditations on their lives in a way that most people don't actually do on a day-to-day basis. And we're kind of there with the narrator, feeling it come from other people, but then we don't get explicit explanations very often about what weight is the what weight is Faye bringing to these conversations. We have to just make assumptions and guesses about that. In my mind, I split Rachel Cusk's work into 3 eras, where the Outline trilogy is the middle era, basically, because I think that's what she became really known for. And I think it's so unique and really a departure from her earlier work. Yet nothing she's done since the Outline trilogy has been like the exact same. So I definitely recommend start with Outline. And then if you like it, then definitely go for Kudos in Transit. I was kind of thinking I might reread these now because I so enjoyed revisiting Outline. They're very similar to Outline. So if you like this one, then you're in for a treat. But before Outline, she wrote, in my mind, more traditional novels. And I have these here. So In the Fold, the Bradshaw Variations, The Country Life, and Arlington Park. And I have also read Saving Agnes, The Temporary, The Lucky Ones. I was just looking at my notes. But I did not keep them. So I didn't find them special enough that I would reread them. I also have moved a lot, so I'm pretty ruthless when it comes to keeping books. Now that I'm revisiting her, I kind of wonder, should I have gotten rid of them? But I also have to trust myself that I knew what I was doing. I wanted to reread In the Fold before I did this video. and it's pretty good. It is very cynical, though. I found it very dark, actually, especially just how everything ends. So, to give a summary, the opening chapter is when the narrator Michael visits a house of these bohemian people that are having a party for their daughter that's his age, and or he might be a couple years older, but he's friends with her brother named Adam. And then we fast forward, and Michael is in his early 30s, and he's married to this woman named Rebecca. And their relationship is struggling. And Michael reconnects with Adam, and then he actually goes back to this house. The writing style is very different than Outline, but it is still very good, and I think very clearly Rachel Cusk. You already see her style. So I was thinking that it's very precise, and her sentences in this book are very long, but they are not flowing, and they are not especially poetic. It's more methodical, precise. She also has some humorous moments, but it's always kind of sarcastic or biting. So it does make you smile, but it's more like smiling a wry smile at kind of how all these characters are so estranged from their own lives. The fact that it has this kind of methodical tone can make it seem a bit detached, which I think you really see in Outline. Outline is like the epitome of detached, because then you don't even have access to like the narrator's thoughts, where you see that kind of style developing in this book. But this book is still much more traditional in the sense that there's a clear plot with the beginning, middle, end, and there's more traditional characters that you meet them at the beginning of the book, and for the most part they follow you throughout the rest of the book. There is also a lot of dialogue in this book, and it's written in just the traditional way. But there's lots of back and forth within a group of people. There'll be a conversation, and people do not go on long monologues. Instead, it's like a couple sentences or just a little retort back and forth. So in that way, it's very different than Outline. Michael visits Adam now that they're in their 30s, and Adam has settled into kind of a comfortable suburban lifestyle, and they both have small children at this point and are married. And Michael makes a lot of observations just about how suffocating and a little fake seeming this kind of suburban middle class existence is. But then Adam's parents, and then also Rebecca, the wife of Michael, Adam's parents, Rebecca and her family, also have this more kind of alternative lifestyle where they're concerned about art. They don't care about kind of social norms and being polite and what's allowed and what's not allowed. And they don't necessarily care about fitting in polite society in a way. They're free-spirited. But then Michael sees also the negatives of that, especially through his marriage to Rebecca. It kind of reminded me of, people talk about now like therapy speak. And I think this novel was very prescient because it kind of shows how therapy speak can be weaponized. Because Rebecca comes across as having a little bit of an odd upbringing that probably messed her up in some way. but that there wasn't any real disaster. So she's a bit like overprivileged. It's like she's very unsatisfied with her marriage to Michael, but we don't see exactly why. We don't see exactly what she's looking for. But of course, we're also seeing it very biased through Michael's eyes. So we don't know if what the story really is. But from his perspective, Rebecca seems pretty hysterical, and it seems almost as if she's just kind of bored with her life that on the surface seems to be pretty easy. And this is a mild spoiler, but she leaves him at the end of the book, which I think we kind of see coming. She leaves a letter when she is leaving him, and it's pretty accusatory of him. And she's saying, one of the things she says is, now I only want freedom. I want the freedom to be what you could never accept that I was. So it's pretty abstract. Let's put it that way. She never gives a very concrete reason as to what she doesn't like about their marriage and what she's hoping to gain by leaving. For Adam's family that initially kind of enchanted Michael, we learn that it's a bit of a sham because they don't have enough money to actually sustain their lifestyle. They live on this kind of grand farm, and they actually raise sheep. And yeah, they have a magnificent house. But then we find that the second wife of Adam's father has actually been funding it and sort of propping everything up. And they fight over money, basically. And that's embroiled also within these fights over how the children were raised, how they were kind of split up between the parents, and the parents' relationship. So it's almost like they have the same problems that they were hoping to escape by living this more alternative or free thinking lifestyle. It's like they're bogged down with the same mundane and materialistic problems. One thing I found so interesting is in outline, in a rare moment of self disclosure, the narrator tells someone she's talking to, there had, I said, been someone. We were still very good friends, but I hadn't wanted to carry on with it. I was trying to find a different way of living in the world. So that sounds actually really similar to Rebecca in The Fold, in the sense it's very abstract. Like, why are they leaving? So I almost thought, like, is Faye from Outline and Rebecca from In the Fold, could they be versions of a very similar person? And it's just that these books are written in a totally different tone. In the Fold is pretty emotionally charged, whereas Outline is so restrained and everything is under the surface. But ultimately, they both apparently left their marriages because of this kind of general dissatisfaction, and saying they need more, in a vague sense. And the vagueness in Outline is that the narrator is just not expanding upon it to us as the audience. And then in The Fold, we aren't able to really understand Rebecca because we're only seeing everything through Michael's eyes. So if you like a more traditional novel, then I would recommend In the Fold. It's a pretty scathing indictment on life, though. Like, it's very critical of kind of suburban middle class existence, but then it's also not offering any alternatives, because it's we see this supposedly alternative lifestyle and see that it's plagued by the same problems. So it's sad. Like, I felt sad at the conclusion of this book in a depressed way. Like, it's depressing. So if that's okay with you, then I would recommend this. But if you want a different traditional style novel that still has all the strengths of Rachel Cusk and that is funnier and not quite as cynical, I would really recommend The Country Life. This is about a girl, a young woman who's kind of running away from her life and to become an au pair in a more rural setting. So it's very funny. There's like lots of scenes of humor, and the main character is a little awkward and is kind of easily embarrassed. But it's charming, and it still has like the wit of Rachel Cusk, the wonderful vocabulary. So I don't know. I almost would recommend this more, but it's slightly happier. So it also depends what you're looking for. For the most recent era of Rachel Cusk, I definitely recommend Second Place. So if you read Outline and liked it, I would definitely recommend going next to Second Place, because it's a little more traditional in that it's a book with a beginning, middle, end, and like normal characters, but it's still a little funkier than her early novels. I love it. It's about a woman with her husband who live in a somewhat remote area, and they eventually invite this artist to come and stay with them, like in their guest house, and just kind of the psychological effect having this man around has on the main character. It also goes into the relationship of the main character to her daughter, who I think is a young adult at this point, and like comes home to visit her mom. Parade, I was a little disappointed by. Honestly, I was pretty disappointed by it. It's her latest before Life of M. I found it actually a little too experimental, which I cringe hearing myself say. It is fairly short. A lot of her books are. So this is 190 some pages. And the way it's formatted, like the margins are pretty large and there's significant space between the lines. So it's a short 190 pages. It's kind of split into different stories that are not fully connected. It also talks a lot about visual art and being an artist. And I think it went a little too far into that for me. Whereas Second Place, that's certainly discussed because it's an artist staying with the couple. But then this one went more in depth into that, and I didn't connect to it as much. I would only recommend it if you really want something pushing the boundaries even more than Outline, in terms of not having a typical plot structure. I still liked reading it. It's just compared to all the other works of Rachel Cusk, I didn't think it was that great. So I'm very nervous about what Life of M is like, because this is her otherwise most recent release. So I wonder if she's going to go down a similar route for her next book. Her nonfiction. So I really like A Life's Work, subtitle On Becoming a Mother. She talks about pregnancy and birth and the first year or so with the baby. I found that it's very honest and it doesn't romanticize things, but it's also not overly cynical or dark. And I think if you like her writing style, I just love that she covered this topic because it's so complicated. I mean, there's so many struggles and challenges, but obviously so many good things about it as well. And so I think she has a really unique, she adds her unique flair to this topic. For The Last Supper, I have mentioned this before. I didn't love it as much, but then I think I'm just holding her to such a high standard because there are still a lot of like little gems in the book and funny anecdotes like about their, so it's like a family road trip from the UK down to Italy and then their time in Italy, and it has insights into just family life and the reality of traveling with other people in general. It does talk about visual art though, like the art they went to see. And for me, I found it dry. It's not something I'm independently interested in, let's say. So the book had to fight an uphill battle to try to get me interested in it. And I didn't find it that interesting in the end. And then Coventry is short stories or short essays because it's declared to be nonfiction. I still just have this bias against short books, short stories, essays, because I just don't feel as engrossed in them. And I like being engrossed in something when I'm reading. She also has a book called Aftermath on her divorce that's nonfiction. And if I remember correctly, there's lots of allusions and connections made to Greek mythology. And again, that's something that I personally don't have a huge interest in otherwise. So seeing it mixed in with the book, for me, it didn't really enhance it. And it perhaps detracted from it. Like, I like her writing in general and what she says about relationships. So I was very excited to read what she says on this topic, but in the end, I didn't like it that much. I mean, I gave it away, that book, because I knew I didn't want to reread it. So I would say outline trilogy, start with this. If you want traditional novel, In the Fold or The Country Life, but really I would say The Country Life. And then if you like something with that kind of experimental flair, second place. Talking about the book design, so I love this design of the outline trilogy. And I really like how it looks, these three books look displayed on my bookshelf. I display these all by themselves. And part of that is because when you put them with the other books that have nominally the same design, it just doesn't go as well because the font is a different size. So it kind of loses this totally like minimalist aesthetic because then it suddenly doesn't all match and it kind of like draws your attention to it. So I guess that's the pitfall of going for an extremely simple design. For me, I accept that books are decoration because, like I mentioned, I've moved so many times. I haven't collected that many other decorations for my apartment. And I'm pretty ruthless about getting rid of books if I genuinely do not believe I will reread them. So the books that I keep are treasured, and I will try to get an attractive copy of a book. And so this was the copy of The Country Life I always had. But I liked this whole aesthetic. And so I actually ordered this. In hopes that it would fit better with the other books of hers that I have. But I found that then when I got it, I didn't like it, partially because it's a slightly different size. So and then look, it doesn't even have like the author, it's flipped the author and the title. These capture the mood of the book so well because there is this kind of sparseness, minimalism, simplicity. There is a simplicity in these books, and that is reflected by this book design that I love. And I assume this cover was released after the Outline series was published, even though The Country Life came before Outline. Like, I'm sure this was a retroactive reissue. And this cover like doesn't work because it's trying to fit this minimalist aesthetic onto this book, but this book does not have the same vibe as the Outline trilogy. And upon reflection, I thought, well, this cover actually represents the book much better. It's not necessarily an upbeat book, but it is not like a minimalist book. And the horse, it almost feels satirical, like when you see this, like making fun of the minimalist thing, because it doesn't really work with this book. And then it's like, okay, it's The Country Life, so let's put a horse on it, a horse's bottom. I think this cover is cool. I think this cover fits the book, but because I didn't love the book as much, I don't love the cover, but it fits the book. Cover I like, but I could do without the blurb on it. I think it would look better without that. This I do not like. I don't like it. This is like okay, and this is also okay. This is kind of about, again, more of this kind of suburban malaise. But again, I don't like, they kind of went for a more trending towards minimalist style, but then I don't like when they put the blurb here because it clutters it up. I also just want to say, even for the hardback ones, it's like the size of the fonts don't match. So if you display these together, does it look good? I don't think so. Thank you for watching, and thank you also if you have subscribed or liked or commented on any of my videos. I'm just starting this channel, so it means a lot. And I'm hoping to get the new book, Life of M, in a few days. So I'm also excited to read that book, and I will be posting my thoughts about it as well.